Hey, everybody. Hope you are keeping well. It is now Monday, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm really happy that you are back with us again. My name is Andre Anderson. I'm both host and founder of BSTL. And of course, by now you should know that BSTL stands for Building Something That Lasts. So anyways, I'm excited. And I got to tell you, I don't always get excited, but I am excited because my guest today, Hymers Wilson, he has as much, but a little bit less gray hair than I do. And so it's good that the gray hair bandits, so to speak, are here on BSTL. Hymers, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Andre. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have you on our podcast, okay? So this is going to be exciting. And before I forget, there's a formality, so I have to stick with this thing. Look, tell us one or two things about who you are, and then we're going to get into this conversation because it's going to be a good one today.
Well, at my age, I've done a lot of different things. I have started off life working on a business studies degree. Then I became a minister. Then I got into counseling, became a full-time counselor and a manager of counselors.
Nice.
And then I am now in retirement. I have become a background performer. So with a designation of additional ACTRA background performer.
Nice. So
that's
you're a big deal. In other words, you're a big deal. So I wanted to make sure that before you head all the way out to Hollywood that I would get your signature or autograph, whatever that looks like. And if not, I also have this soundbite as well as the video as well. So Hymers, on this podcast, we talk about all things leadership, right? Because I think in the 21st century, one of the things that this planet seems to be yearning for is strong leadership. And of course, leadership has different nuances and it looks different depending on where you are. But, the goal of this is to talk about leadership from a positive perspective. There are some people who thrive as leaders, but some of their methodologies maybe not so ethical, and so we want to stay away from those things. But we want to talk today about the fallacy of legacy. So one of the words that I hear a lot these days is people talking about legacy. And when they talk about legacy, it's often, what are you going to leave? What is your mark going to be after you retire or after you transition out of wherever it is that you're working? And sadly, in terms of my perspective, and look, on this podcast, you can disagree with me if you want to. I think sometimes what ends up happening is people spend so much time trying to create a legacy for themselves that what they leave behind are fragments and pieces that those that are still there after they've transitioned have to continue to work with. And so I wanted to have this conversation with you because you have led in various capacities. And of course, now that you're doing this acting thing, you're behind the scenes, but still in front of the camera, so to speak. So we want to talk about this legacy building. And I know we're going to talk about, this thing that you call managerial tinkering. That's a new social construct. Maybe that's all the way from the UK, but maybe you want to just lead us a little bit in terms of what you want to talk about as it relates to this legacy building thing.
Yeah, well, early in my life, I was working on a business studies degree, as I said earlier, and part of that involved doing a placement, a 1-year placement at Ford Motor Company in Brentwood, Essex in England. And I noticed that there were the managers who prided themselves on being hard ass, if you excuse the expression, who pride themselves on being ruthless. And it occurred to me very early on, and I would have been in my 20s at that point, that being ruthless was not a good managerial style because it didn't really engender the feeling of wanting to work your hardest in those situations. You were working out of a sense of fear of that manager who was ruthless.
Yeah.
And fast forward to my time working as a counselor, I saw managers come and go, and managers would just they would institute new changes ruthlessly
Yeah.
because they just wanted to leave their mark on the organization. They wanted to be able to say, well, I came in, I did something that was different to make sure that people remembered me afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, in many cases, it wasn't done with a lot of thought. It wasn't done with an eye to, well, what has happened in the past?
Yes.
And in my own experience, going into a new situation, a new church, a new becoming a manager of a set of counselors.
Yeah.
My strategy was to watch and see how things worked first. See how the organization worked first, see what people were used to first. And then as I saw any need, then make changes as necessary, as needed, not just for its own sake, not changes for their own sake.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you started that way, right? Because this is part of the fallacy of legacy and leadership that somehow, people believe that if you can leave a mark, that apparently that's the thing, that's the most important thing. But the challenge that I have as one who leads as well is that when you go into this space, this marketplace that somebody else has been serving in, working in, directing, managing, and you get there and it's completely shaped around that person's personality, there's not a whole lot that you can do with that, because it's either you become that or you will, experience some of the pushback, because now people expect you to be the exact same way. And of course, the challenge is, if that was a good previous leader, then that's a good thing. But when they are not a good leader, and you now have to kind of unfold and unpack all of this thing, you've got some struggles that you got to go through.
And I've seen both types. There's a person I know who I just admire her leadership skills. But one thing that occurred to me as you were just saying that, and that is that many times managers would come in and make changes without consultation, without consultation with the people who are doing the work. And I've heard this from my wife who works in a hospital.
Yeah.
The same thing. The upper management will say, well, okay, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. Well, did you ask the people on the front lines? Did you ask them how things are going? How do they work? What's needed here? So managers become bosses rather than resource. And that to me, a manager is the best type of managers are a resource. They help the front line. They are an assistance to the front line. They provide you with tools and ideas and processes that help the front line, not hinder the front line. And a lot of times, some of those changes that are made by managers hinder the operation rather than help the operation. Why? Because they haven't taken the time to ask, okay, you're seeing the person, that comes through the door.
Yes.
What is your experience? You're seeing, the person at the point of contact with this agency. What is your experience? What could we do to help you? No, instead, the manager comes along and says, well, okay, today we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, because of some mandate that has come from above, from senior management.
And I'm glad you said that, Hymers, because here's the question then, the $1 million question for me. Who do we hold accountable? The face that we see, or do we hold the face that we responsible for this behavior, this kind of boss mentality, this execution mentality? Somebody has to be accountable for it. Where do you put it?
That's a tough one, because a lot of times accountability is expected of the person on the front line, and less so as you get further up. Now, that's not to say there's no accountability further up. I mean, what tends to happen is the big boss, the one at the top of the pyramid, has his or her way of dealing with things that they don't like in middle management. Yes, and so they have their own, sometimes brutal ways. Yes, I mean, I've come from an organization. I was talking to a colleague, a former colleague, and he was saying that there's I can't mention names, but there was a particular woman who came in to the organization, and has been brutal in moving people out. And one of the reasons for that is it appears that this senior manager, CEO, let's put it that way, has a strategy of keeping everybody on their toes by moving people out. They move them out, get new fresh people in, so that there's less challenge to their own position. So accountability is difficult, more difficult at the top, but that's as much as I can say on that.
Well, I think part of it is too, though. I think as managers, leaders, when you get somewhere, you have to be clear on who you are and what you bring to the table. Because I think sometimes, and I think this is true no matter where you work, sometimes upper management is so far removed from the process. The people on the front lines, like when they see a name that comes up, there's a number with that person or a name, but you don't know them. You don't know their family background. You don't know what stage of life they are. You don't know the struggles. And all you're looking at is there's a spreadsheet, because there is a number, and the number is important, but you don't get to the number by sacrificing the people who are on the front lines.
Yeah. And that, I can think of examples of people from the ministry. Now, this is not from my own industry, but it's from an industry my wife worked in. People would come from the ministry to check and see, to do an audit and see how are things working in this particular agency and so forth. And they would swoop in, and again, no idea what really works on the front line, but coming with a set of demands and impositions that they expect the front line to carry out. And sometimes it makes no sense. But again, there's little consultation, significant consultation, because you have this other syndrome where they will ask for your feedback. And they don't really take it on. I've been asked for my input into 5-year plans, and you never hear anything else about that. That the feedback that you've given, you never hear, okay, what is the result of or everybody's feedback? What are people telling us? We don't hear afterwards. After we've been surveyed, what they did with that survey. I remember one place where I had said it would be nice to have in senior management more people from minorities, more people from the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, group, as well as people who are disabled and so forth. I gave that input, and I've never heard from that day to this. I've never heard, well, was this put together? What was there? There was no feedback. Let's put it that way. There's no feedback to say, well, this is what people are telling us.
And, I'm glad you said that, because I think that struggle is real at any level of leadership. I think that, and it's kind of like DEI, right? Diversion, inclusion, equity, that's the big catchphrase. And I believe in it. However, what you're looking at is a bunch of organizations, a lot of them, that are so intent on proving that they don't discriminate, that they put a lot of things in place to say these are the optics, but when you really begin to drill down underneath the organization, nothing has changed. So then I want to come back to this question, or you can continue on here, because earlier in the conversation you said something about making changes without consultation. How long? Because, part of the good thing of being a leader, a manager, whatever level you're at, you've got to make some changes right away while you are still, and I put it in quotes, objective. But how much is too much, or how much is not enough?
Yeah, that's a tough. You asked some very good questions.
I'm so glad I don't have to answer.
Yeah, I personally, I would have to use my own experience.
Sure.
I personally am a fan of incremental change that doesn't disrupt things so badly that the situation becomes the processes become what's the word I'm looking for, unrecognizable.
Okay.
So yeah, I would, as I said earlier, I would come in and get a feel for what's going on, get a feel for how the organization is progressing, and then listen to my workers and listen to those people who are doing the frontline, especially the frontline work, and say, well, okay, well, it seems to me that this could be improved or that could be improved. What do you think? And that's the way I would go about it. So incremental change, I think, for me, is probably better than a wholesale disruptive change.
Now, Hymers, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this may be the only place that I might disagree with you, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
So I'm not disagreeing with the principle of incremental change, but I think that the environment also dictates how quickly. Yeah, so I want to add that. I mean, by way of context, I didn't say that when I gave the question, because there are some places that cannot stand another day to be that way. And so even though it may be disruptive, it may create a certain level of angst. If you don't make the adjustment sooner than later, it may be the cost of the organization and ultimately the people who are on the front line, because they're not looking at spreadsheets. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if that's the case, and I agree with you that sometimes things have been going so drastically wrong that there needs to be quick change. If that's the case, then consultation is crucial.
Okay.
Getting people together, communication, consultation is crucial.
Yeah.
And the best manager that I've ever had was a very, very good communicator, letting you know what's happening in the organization as a whole, letting you know any news that may affect the organization from outside the organization.
Love that.
That person was a great communicator, and I told her to this day, I always tell her, I say, you're the best manager I ever had.
Yeah.
Somebody who was knowledgeable and who was able to communicate very, very effectively about everything that could possibly impact our group of workers.
I'm glad you said that. You didn't use the word, but I think I'm hearing you say transparency.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If there is a thing that bothers me when I read about, these case studies, when I see, I'm like, why is everything such a military secret?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
To those that are following the bouncing ball, following the market, they've got the data, they've gotten, the previous 3 or 4 quarters worth of information. The writing is on the wall. It's part of the reasons why people's faces are tense. The door is closed. You've got some visitors coming from outside, the stakeholders, and they're here to say, look, either you change or you die. What is it about transparency that leadership doesn't buy into so much?
I'll tell you from my point of view, and I've seen this from very early on when I was a student at a college in England.
Okay.
And I was on part of the student council.
Yes.
When I say student council, it was like the student union, put it that way.
Sure.
And there was a proposal that we were looking at.
Yes.
And the president of the student council was saying, "Oh, let's not tell them this or that. Let's just go and there's a guy on the floor who's going to be a bit troublesome. Let's not tell."
Yeah.
And I was astounded. I think transparency is the right word.
Yeah.
And I have seen in my experience leaders who keep their cards close to their chests about anything that that they are privy to. In the higher management circles, because they sit on committees above us. They they sit and they hear all kinds of things about the college and so on. But they keep it a secret. And I think it's to keep people off balance. I think it's because sometimes they are not sure of their own. There's a word for it. I can never remember it, but they're not sure of their own position. They're a little bit. They're a little bit unsure of themselves and how well they're doing. And so in order to keep their head and shoulders above the other workers, they keep these secrets so that they will always be the fount of knowledge.
And I got to tell you, as you were saying that, I felt my skin crawling a little bit. Because here's the thing, because sometimes in terms of getting those that you are leading to respond in a positive way, it comes through the transparency. Like, why not tell somebody or groups of people, look, if we don't begin to adjust in this thing that is measurable, we're going to be out of business in 12 to 14 months. Tell somebody that. I mean, fine, they may quit, right? Because the writing is on the wall. But I think for most people, if they understand why it is that you are giving these drastic or incremental changes, then they can see that they are a part of the solution and not the problem. I mean, and that's a whole new different podcast altogether, because as leaders, we do make the assumption that for those that are on frontline, if they would just comply, if they would just do everything I tell you, then this problem would go away and we would be excelling and exceeding. But the truth is, a lot of times, by way of observation, it's not your frontline workers. They're so into the dark that they assume that as long as they're getting there from 9 to 5, 7:30 to 3:30, we've met our objective. And so if that bottom line is not happening, it can't be us. We're there. So tell them. Just tell them.
Yeah, you're right. Just let them know, let them understand what else is going on, and how it fits into the larger picture. And that was a problem I had as a kid. Doing my my placement in Ford Motor Company. I really didn't know how my little job, which was comparing numbers of optional extras on cars, how it fit into the wider, the big picture. And frankly, there was nobody who kind of took me under their wing and said, you know what, Hymers, this is how it fits in. This is how, and if you do this, then it helps us. And I was naive back in those days. I didn't ask the questions either. So some of the blame was on me. But you know what I'm saying? Information is crucial. Information is key. And when people understand what's going on, you have a better chance. When they understand that you're a resource, a manager is a resource, a leader is a resource, and not a boss. And I make a distinction between bosses and managers who are a resource. If a worker understands that you're a resource, you're there to help them. You're there to guide them. You're there to give them the resources to help. Then I think you get more. And a manager that's compassionate. I have to throw that in.
Yeah, please put it in there.
Yes. In my experience, I have determined that compassion goes a long way. You get more out of people, if I can put it in such crass terms, but you get, compassion goes a long way. Yeah. I can remember a time, by the way, when a worker came to me. I was a manager at a counseling agency, in a mental health agency. A worker came to me and said, my aunt has died and I'd like to go to the funeral. Well, we had a policy that, you can only go if it's a close relative, like a mother, father, sister, brother. But an aunt, but then he explained to me that this aunt was instrumental in bringing him up. I mean, it wasn't just an aunt.
Right.
And so on that basis, I said, you go ahead. You go right ahead. And you can take time off, take the time to go to the funeral and so forth. And that, for me, is a compassionate managerial practice, rather than saying, well, the rule says, you can't go unless it's a, close blood relative. And I think that also highlights, the difference between laws and the spirit of the law. And
I'm glad you said that. But okay, so again, I want to push back a little bit.
Yes.
Because the idea of compassion, it has different nuances. So I agree with the example that you've given because, it doesn't fit the letter of the law, but the compassion of the law, I get why you did that. And then at the same time, I wonder about what that looks like in moments where compassion is, you've got to be a little bit more strong and more forceful in getting things done, because at the end of the day, if you lose your job, and when I say you, I'm talking about those that you lead along with you as a leader, you lose your job because you're loved and liked by everybody, but you don't meet the objectives. I think that there's a little bit of a balancing act between compassion perceived as well as compassion that is required while it's inclusive of being able to hold individuals accountable.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, compassion and love doesn't necessarily mean a free-for-all, and a laissez-faire operation. No, I think you're absolutely right.
So we did say we were going to talk about tinkering a little bit.
Oh,
I want to come back to that, right?
Yeah.
So please help us to understand what you mean when you say managerial tinkering. What does that look like? Because we're still talking about legacy, right? So we're talking about compassion, we're talking about a bunch of different things, but this tinkering thing, it's also part of this legacy building.
Yeah, I think we've probably already mentioned it, but I think it bears repeating that a manager will come in and they'll say, okay, it's hard to do this without giving examples, and it's hard to give examples without giving away specific situations. But a manager that will come in and require a new process, and without enough thought and without enough looking at how industry practices and what's best for the organization on the ground.
Sure.
And they will do this one year, and then the next year they will do it something else, and you're left floundering because one example is that something that was working years ago, has been changed by a manager years ago.
Yes.
To something to from A to B. The new manager will come in and say, "Oh, I don't like the way B is going. I think we should change." And what they have actually done is they've actually changed it from B back to A.
Right. Yeah, but called it something different.
And called it something different.
Yeah. And
so it's baffling.
Yes.
I wish I could give a concrete example, because we go, okay, I remember when I was working at a community mental health agency, there were some ministry papers that came out based on research that was saying that the best thing to address mental health is one-stop shopping. A person will come into an agency, and this is how it tends to work, where they will come into the agency, and if they have, say for counseling, mental health counseling, and they have a serious mental illness, but then they also have an addiction problem, so we would send them down the road to addiction outreach.
Sure. Yeah.
When you send them out that door, they have all kinds of different thoughts going through their heads, and they never get there.
Right.
They never get to the addiction help.
Right.
Because they had to go out the door and go down the street, think about it, and say, well, nah, I don't want to need this.
Yeah.
Now, with the OneStop Shop in the agency I worked at, they brought addiction counseling services into the same building as the counseling. And so if I had a client that had a mental illness, and now I discover they have addiction issues, I just walk them down the stairs to the addiction office.
Right.
One-stop shopping.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in a situation where in a place where I work, they hived off disability services from counseling services. And so a person had to wander from a counseling office to a disability office,
right.
see two different people, whereas before,
yes,
we were doing everything together.
Sure.
In other words, we were serving a person who had mental health issues and disability issues.
Sure.
We did that work for them.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because I think part of what you're talking about now is this intersectionality, this bridge building and collaboration simultaneously. And I think that's the thing that's missing, for those that are into this legacy thing, right? And that's why I say it's a fallacy, is that your legacy is never in isolation, right? So no matter how great of a leader that you may or may not be, it comes in connection with other individuals, and you've called them right as human resources that are helping to support the initiative. But the challenge, Hymers, is the need for the monument. And the monument is the metaphor for the, there's a plaque on the wall, for the great service. And I wish that when people would acknowledge individuals who have demonstrated a high level of execution and leadership, on their plaque, put the people that worked with them.
That's a good idea.
Right? Because at the end of the day, show how you had different individuals that were supporting you, and here were their skill sets, so that when you begin to talk about this thing that will be in the rearview mirror, because nothing lasts forever, then you can say, well, this was the skill set of the person on the plaque, but that person was there, and this is what they brought to the table, so that people can now begin to team build in a much more intentional way. I'll stop there.
No, that's excellent. Because very often people are forgotten, and they will complain, they will grumble and say, this person's taking all the credit. Yeah. But we're the ones who did the work. Right. Or even we're the ones who had the idea.
Absolutely. Because the leader has the pen and the ear of those that are a little bit further up the food chain. Right. Hymers, you're not going to believe this. I won't even tell you how much time we've spent already. And I know this won't be the last time you come back, but I do want you to give us a takeaway, right? So we've talked about a lot of different things, but as we kind of focus in on this fallacy, or the fallacy behind legacy, is there a takeaway that you would like our listeners to come away with this go around?
Yeah, very much so. And it's been a big part of my thinking over the years, and that is that leaders need to help rather than hinder. The boss mentality does not really work. Now, it may get results, but when the boss mentality does get results, there's collateral damage. People are hurt. People are left in the wake, eating the dust of the boss. And as I say, the best bosses are the ones who take their people with them, who communicate, who show compassion. And I'll tell you, the best boss I had did not take stupidity lightly either. They did not suffer fools. They did not, for example, there may be people who would hog a conversation in a meeting. And that boss was very good at shutting them down and moving things along. Sure. So that's the takeaway that I'd like people to have. This boss mentality for me anyway, does not work.
And maybe it doesn't even work in this culture, right? I think the boss mentality, after people become more informed, that thing diminishes. It goes into the sunset. And so, you've now opened another can of worms that we'll get to next time. But, the reality is, I think the goal here is, if you're going to set this legacy, it's got to be one of help and not hindrance. Right. I think that's what I'm hearing you say, because leadership. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and something you said there reminds me of the fact that in today's world, there's a lot more information out there that's available to people. For example, if I go to my doctor,
Yeah.
Sometimes I've already had a look at my symptoms.
Right.
I've Googled it.
You're much more informed.
And I go to my doctor with a sense of what might be going on.
Yeah.
And then I want to hear his opinion.
Sure.
If he now, and I know from my parents' experience, the doctor will give them pills and they'll take them home and they don't even know what the pills are,
sure.
what they do, and so forth, because there's that old model of the doctor knows best.
The boss.
He's the boss.
That's right.
Whereas nowadays you've got more information out there. It's better, and I think people are becoming more and more in tune with this idea of being a collaborator.
Yes.
And not waiting for something to descend from the heavens.
Yeah.
Unless you're a Trump supporter. Sorry.
How dare you? How dare you?
I couldn't resist.
Well, no, it's fine. And I'm not editing it out either. So it's okay. I got you. Hymers, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. This has been more than insightful. I thank you for your wisdom and your experience and your openness and your transparency. I hope this is not going to be the last time, right? So make sure that you stay tuned. And to our listeners, thank you again for joining us. I know this conversation was a little bit longer than we normally do, but this was needed. Like if I tried to cut this shorter, I don't think that they would have gotten, you guys would have gotten the real big picture of this conversation. This idea around building legacy, it has to be in concert with people. The people that you are building with, they're also helping you to build something that lasts. So you have to honor them by how you treat them, but also you've got to give them a name. You've got to give those people a name because they deserve to move up. They deserve to have an opportunity to lead in another capacity based on your mentorship and their experiences as they learn from, as you learn from them as well. So until next time, look, if you want to have this conversation, send me an email, bstlinc21@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. And again, Hymers, thank you for joining. Until next week, Monday, look, I've enjoyed this today. Take care for now.
You're very welcome.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.